There's a specific kind of pain that doesn't come from strangers, doesn't come from enemies. It comes from someone you trusted completely, someone you called your best friend. I lost $50,000 in one night. Not because I was stupid, not because I didn't see the signs, but because I chose to ignore them. And by the time I realized what had happened, there was nothing left to save. Not the money, not the friendship, and for a while, not even my sense of myself. If you've ever trusted someone more than you trusted your own instincts, stay with me. This one's for you. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 34 years old and I live in Columbus, Ohio right now. I'm not a finance guy, I'm not some business expert. I'm just someone who went through something that changed the way I see people, money, and honestly, myself. And I've been quiet about this story for a long time, but I think it's time to talk about it. This happened back in 2019. I was 28 years old. I had been working a regular corporate job at a logistics company for about 5 years. Decent pay, stable, nothing exciting. But I had been saving, quietly, consistently, for years. I had managed to put away around $52,000. For a lot of people, that might not sound like a lot. But for me, growing up the way I did, in a single-income household in a small town outside of Dayton, that felt like a fortune. That money represented years of packed lunches, skipped vacations, and overtime shifts I didn't complain about. It was mine. Every single dollar of it. And then I met Marcus again. I say again because Marcus and I had grown up together. We went to the same middle school, same high school. He was the kind of person who lit up every room he walked into. Charismatic, funny, always had a plan, always had an idea. You know the type. Even back then, Marcus had this energy that made you want to be part of whatever he was doing. We had drifted apart in our early 20s. He moved to Atlanta for a while, I stayed closer to home. But in the summer of 2019, he came back to Columbus, and we picked up right where we left off, like no time had passed at all. The first few months of reconnecting were genuinely great. We'd grab food, watch games, talk about life. Marcus had stories from Atlanta, some business ventures he'd been part of, some that worked, some that didn't. He was honest about the failures, which I respected. Or at least, I thought he was being honest. Then, one evening in September, we're sitting at this sports bar we used to go to when we were younger. It's actually still there, off Broad Street. And Marcus gets quiet, serious, which was unusual for him. He said, "D, I've been working on something, and I need a partner I can actually trust." I remember leaning back in my chair. I didn't say anything right away. He laid it out. He'd been in contact with a supplier. He said it was a wholesale clothing and merchandise distribution deal. Small brands, streetwear, some athletic gear. The pitch was that they had a supplier connection overseas. Goods would come in, get resold through online platforms and small retail partners here in the States. He said he'd already mapped out the first few product runs. He showed me numbers on his phone, projected margins, estimated returns. It looked clean. It looked thought out. He needed $50,000 to cover the first shipment and initial operational costs. He said he had another 20 coming from a silent partner in Atlanta. I want to be clear about something. Right in that moment, I had a feeling. It wasn't panic. It wasn't a loud alarm going off. It was quieter than that, like a small voice in the back of my head saying, "Slow down." But Marcus was sitting right there, looking me in the eye, talking about trust, talking about how this was our shot to build something real, and I drowned that voice out. I told him I'd think about it. Over the next 3 weeks, we talked about it constantly. He sent me documents, or what looked like documents, a business plan, an LLC registration, a letter of intent from the supplier. Looking back, none of it had the kind of detail that a real business arrangement would have. The supplier's name was vague, the address was vague, but I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't experienced in international trade. I was just a guy with a savings account and a childhood friend I trusted. And here's the thing, and I really want people to hear this. The red flags weren't big, dramatic moments. They were small, easy to explain away. Like when I asked Marcus if I could talk to the supplier directly, he said the guy was hard to reach. Communication went through a broker. Okay, fine, that happens. When I asked to see the LLC paperwork with more detail, he said his accountant had the originals, but he'd get me copies. The copies never came, and I never pushed hard enough. When I asked if we could bring in a third person, a mutual friend of ours who had some business experience, Marcus got a little defensive. Not angry, just deflective. He said he wanted to keep this between us for now. Too many cooks, he said. Each one of those moments, I made a choice. I chose to interpret them in his favor, because this was Marcus. I'd known this man since we were 12 years old. It was a Thursday night in late October. Marcus called and said the supplier had moved up the timeline. The window to lock in the first shipment was closing. He needed the money wired by the next morning or we'd lose the deal entirely. That urgency should have stopped me cold. Any rational business person will tell you that a real deal doesn't evaporate overnight. Pressure like that, artificial deadlines, now or never framing, that's a manipulation tactic. I know that now. I really do. But in that moment, I was standing at my apartment, phone against my ear, and all I could think was, this is my chance. 5 years of savings sitting in an account doing nothing. Marcus on the other end of the line, who I'd known half my life, telling me this was real. I wired the money the next morning. $50,000. Gone in about 40 seconds on a bank transfer screen. Marcus texted me immediately. We're in business, brother. For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. Marcus was upbeat, talking about timelines, saying the shipment was in transit. I was nervous but hopeful. I kept telling myself, give it time. Then the updates started getting shorter, vaguer. There's a delay at customs. Then the broker's handling it. Then the texts started coming slower. About 3 weeks in, I couldn't reach him at all for 4 days straight. You know that feeling when you know something's wrong but you're still bargaining with yourself? I kept coming up with explanations. Maybe his phone broke. Maybe there was a real logistics issue. Maybe I was overreacting. On the 5th day, he called me. His voice was different, flat. He said there had been a complication with the supplier. He said the funds were tied up. He used language I'd never heard him use before. It sounded rehearsed, almost legal. He said he was looking into options. I asked him straight, Marcus, where's my money? He said, D, I'm working on it. That was the last real conversation we had. I remember sitting on my couch that night after that call, just sitting there, not crying, not panicking, just completely still. And in that stillness, the truth landed on me all at once, not piece by piece, all of it at once. I had known, some part of me had known all along, and I had chosen, consciously, repeatedly, to look away, because it was easier to trust him than to ask the questions that might have broken the friendship. I protected the friendship at the cost of my own protection. $50,000, 5 years of my life, and I had handed it over willingly because I was too afraid of being the guy who didn't believe in his friend. I contacted a lawyer. That cost money I now barely had. The lawyer reviewed what I'd sent, the documents, the texts, the wire transfer records, and was very straightforward with me. What I had was a civil matter, possibly fraud, but proving it was going to be a long and expensive process with uncertain outcomes. Wire transfers are notoriously hard to claw back, especially when the paper trail is intentionally messy. I filed a police report. I talked to the FBI's financial crimes tip line. Nothing moved quickly. Nothing moved at all, really. Marcus had set things up, whether intentionally from the start or as he went along, in a way that made accountability nearly impossible. The LLC existed on paper. The agreement was vague enough to be interpreted as a failed investment rather than fraud.
There was no clear legal line that made prosecution simple. I spent about 8 months in total trying to pursue it through every avenue I could, and I had to make a decision at some point. Keep burning money on legal fees for an outcome that might never come, or accept the loss and find a way to move forward. That was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. Letting go of the fight felt like letting him win, but I was also watching my remaining savings shrink. I had to stop.
I want to talk about something that I don't think gets discussed enough in these kinds of stories. Everyone focuses on the money. And yes, losing $50,000 is devastating. It's real. I won't minimize it. But what wrecked me more was the identity piece. I thought of myself as a smart person, careful. I wasn't someone who made impulsive decisions. I was the one in my friend group who read the fine print. And yet here I was. I had been the easiest mark imaginable. Because I had confused loyalty with discernment. I thought trusting someone fully was a virtue. I thought questioning a friend was somehow a betrayal of friendship. I withdrew. For several months, I barely talked to people outside of work. Not because I was depressed in a clinical sense, I want to be careful how I say this, but because I genuinely didn't know how to recalibrate my judgment. If I could be this wrong about someone I'd known for over 15 years, what did that mean about everyone else in my life? That's the quieter damage, the kind that doesn't show up in a bank statement. About 6 months after everything fell apart, I was having dinner with my older sister. I hadn't told her the full story yet, just bits and pieces. But that night, I told her everything. And she said something that I've thought about almost every day since. She said, "Daniel, you didn't lose that money because you were naive. You lost it because you were loyal to a version of Marcus that hadn't existed in years. You were trusting the 12-year-old kid you grew up with, not the 30-year-old man sitting in front of you." That hit me differently than anything else had. Because she was right. I had never actually reevaluated Marcus as an adult. I had imported all of this trust from childhood and applied it wholesale to a person I barely actually knew anymore. I had given him credit for a relationship we'd built decades ago without asking whether he'd maintained it. I think a lot of people do this, with old friends, with family members, with people who carry the weight of shared history. We confuse duration with depth. We confuse "I've known them long" with "I know them well." It took about 2 years to get my savings back to a meaningful number. I picked up a second income stream, cut expenses in ways that weren't comfortable, and just kept moving. I won't pretend that part was inspiring. It was mostly just grinding, quietly, without much to celebrate along the way. But something did change in me that I'm actually grateful for. And I say that carefully because I'm not going to stand here and tell you losing $50,000 was a blessing in disguise. It wasn't. It was a loss. Plain and simple. But the version of me that exists now makes decisions differently. I ask more questions. I don't interpret pushback on questions as rudeness. I understand that healthy business relationships, and honestly healthy personal ones, can withstand scrutiny. If someone gets defensive when you ask for documentation, that's information. If someone creates urgency to rush a major decision, that's information. If your gut says slow down and the other person's energy says hurry up, that tension is telling you something. Listen to it. So what do I want you to take away from this? A few things, and I'll try to be specific because vague advice doesn't help anyone. First, trust is not the same as due diligence. You can trust someone and still ask for documentation. You can love someone and still get a second opinion. These things are not in conflict. Anyone who tells you they are is protecting themselves, not you. Second, emotional history is not a substitute for current evidence. The person you knew 10 years ago is not necessarily the person sitting across from you today. People change. Not always for the better. And you are responsible to assess who they are now, not just who they were. Third, urgency is almost always a manipulation. Real opportunities don't require you to abandon your judgment. They can hold up under a few extra days of questions. If someone is pressuring you to move fast on something significant, slow down every time, without exception. And fourth, the cost of asking hard questions is almost always smaller than the cost of not asking them. I was so worried about making Marcus feel distrusted that I made myself completely vulnerable. That calculation was wrong, and I paid for it. I don't know where Marcus is now. I genuinely don't. I stopped looking a while ago, and I've had to make peace with the fact that there may never be accountability, at least not the kind that shows up in a courtroom or a refund. Some losses you just carry, and you learn to carry them differently over time. But I'm okay. I really am. Not in a performative way, not in an everything happens for a reason way. Just, I came through it. I understand something now that I didn't before. And maybe that understanding is worth something, even if the price was too high. This channel is called Behind My Silence for a reason, because there are things we go through that we don't talk about. Not because they don't matter, but because they matter too much. This was one of mine. If you've been carrying something like this, a betrayal, a financial hit, a friendship that turned into a wound, I just want you to know that silence isn't weakness. But eventually, it helps to speak it out loud, even if it's just once. Take care of yourselves out there. And please, before you sign anything, wire anything, or commit anything, ask one more question than you think you need to. That question might be the most important investment you ever make.